The night was heavy with rain. Thick clouds covered the sky, and the streets of the colony world glistened under the dim glow of flickering lamps. The air smelled of wet dust and rusted metal, the kind of smell that told stories of hard lives and forgotten corners. Most houses were locked tight against the storm, their steel shutters rattling as the wind pushed against them. Daniel walked home slowly from the power plant, his coat pulled tightly around his shoulders. He was tired more than usual. His shift had been long, and the machines had fought him every step of the way. His boots squelched in the shallow puddles, and all he could think of was warmth, food, and the quiet comfort of his small home. When he reached his doorstep, he stopped. At first he thought the sound he heard was just the storm. Metal creaking, water dripping, something ordinary. But then it came again. A faint scratching, light and hesitant, almost too soft to notice. He frowned, leaning closer to the door, and then he heard it, something like a whimper. Cautiously, Daniel pressed the door panel and let it slide open. The warm yellow light of his home spilled into the wet darkness outside. For a moment, the storm was all he saw. Then his eyes dropped to the ground and his heart froze. A small figure was curled up on his porch. She was drenched, fur plastered to her thin frame. Long ears lay flat against her head, trembling with each gust of cold wind. Her tail was wrapped tightly around herself, as if it were the only shield she had left against the cruel night. Her eyes lifted slowly when the light touched her. Large, golden eyes that seemed far too old for such a fragile body. They glowed faintly in the dark, feline and strange, but filled with exhaustion and pain. Daniel took a step closer without meaning to. His voice came out softer than he expected. "Hey, are you all right?" The girl flinched at the sound. She looked ready to bolt, muscles tensing under her wet fur, claws twitching slightly. But she didn't move. She only opened her mouth, and the weakest whisper came out. "Help, please." Daniel's chest tightened. He had seen many things since coming to this colony. Broken machines, broken men, people fighting over scraps. But this, a child or nearly a child left in the storm like discarded trash, that was something else. He crouched down, careful not to move too quickly, and held out a hand. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." Her golden eyes darted to his face, searching for danger. Every part of her screamed of fear of betrayal, fear of pain. But she didn't pull away when he gently slipped the blanket from his pack around her shoulders. She was so cold that her shivers shook her entire body. Daniel didn't think. He acted. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how light she was. She weighed almost nothing, as if hunger had carved away everything but bone and fear. She gave a faint gasp, claws curling against his coat, but she didn't fight. She simply pressed her head against his chest, too weak to resist. Inside the house, warmth replaced the storm. Daniel moved quickly, setting her near the heater and wrapping her tighter in the blanket. He fetched a cup, filled it with warm broth, and placed it in her trembling hands. She stared at it for a moment as though she didn't understand what it was. Then, almost desperately, she drank. The broth spilled down her chin, but she didn't stop until it was gone. Only then did her body relax a little. Her tail loosened from around her legs. Her ears twitched upward, still uncertain but no longer flat with terror. She whispered again, voice breaking. "Thank you." And before Daniel could say anything, her eyes slid closed. She slumped forward into the blanket, asleep before he could even move. Daniel sat there staring at the fragile figure curled up by his heater. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know why she had come to his doorstep or what kind of trouble might follow her. All he knew was that she was alive because he had opened the door, and for some reason, as he listened to the storm rage outside, Daniel knew that his life had just changed forever. The storm raged outside, but inside Daniel's small home there was a fragile warmth that felt almost sacred. Kaylee, this was the name she whispered before drifting into sleep, was still curled in the blanket, her breathing shallow but steady. Daniel sat on the edge of the couch, watching her chest rise and fall, his mind spinning with questions. How had she ended up here? Who had left her alone in the storm? And most importantly, what could he do to help her? He moved quietly to the kitchen and poured himself a cup of tea. Steam curled into the air, filling the small space with a comforting aroma. He wanted to think, but every sound from the storm outside, the gusting wind, the clatter of rain on metal, the distant hum of colony machinery, pulled him back to her. Every small shiver from her body made him flinch. She was so small, so fragile, and so utterly alone. Daniel sat back down, tea in hand, and let himself take in her presence. Her fur, damp and matted, caught the light from the heater, giving her an almost otherworldly glow. Her ears twitched occasionally, a nervous reflex. Her tail twitched too, curling and uncurling as if it had a mind of its own. There was something mesmerizing about her. But more than that, there was an unmistakable plea in her gaze, even in sleep, for protection, for care. After a long moment, he gently touched her shoulder. Kaylee stirred immediately, eyes snapping open, wide and wary. Don't touch me," she whispered, voice trembling. Daniel shook his head slowly. "I won't hurt you, I just want to make sure you're okay." For a long moment, her golden eyes searched his face. There was fear there, yes, but also something else, a flicker of hope, fragile as glass. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she leaned slightly into his hand. Daniel let it rest there, offering warmth without saying a word. Finally, he broke the silence. "You must be hungry, here." He held out another cup of warm broth. Kaylee's eyes widened. Her tail flicked nervously. I can't eat much," she murmured. "You can try." "You need strength," Daniel said softly. "You've been out in the storm too long." She looked down at the cup, then back at him. There was a long pause, a hesitation that spoke of old betrayals of trust that had been broken again and again. But finally she took it, slowly at first, then more eagerly, as if realizing that the warmth and sustenance were real and safe. Some broth spilled onto her fur, but she didn't stop until it was gone. When she was finished, she slumped back into the blanket, exhausted, and whispered, Thank you. I don't know why you're helping me." Daniel sat beside her, heart heavy. "Because no one should be left out in the cold. No one, not like this. Not anyone." Kaylee blinked, and for the first time she seemed almost human in her expression, though her features were undeniably feline. "No one?" she repeated, voice small and doubtful. "Not even humans?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "Not even humans. I don't care who you are or what you are. Right now, you're alive, and that's what matters." Her ears twitched, and she leaned a little closer, resting her head near his arm. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes. She trusted him at least a little. And Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, an urgency to protect, to nurture, to be the reason she survived another night. He began to make a small bed for her on the floor, layering blankets and cushions. Kaylee watched, her eyes never leaving him until he stepped back. "You can sleep here tonight," he said simply. "It's safer, warmer, and you'll be okay. I promise." For a moment she hesitated, but then she moved, curling carefully onto the bed he had made. Her tail wrapped around her like a shield, and she let out a soft sigh, almost like relief. Daniel sat down across from her and simply watched, listening to the rain, listening to her even breathing, feeling a strange, tender connection forming between them. There were no words, no declarations, only the quiet understanding that in this cold, unforgiving colony 2 lives had collided, and somehow, that collision was the beginning of something stronger than fear. Outside, the storm continued its relentless beat, but inside, in that small room, a human and a feline girl found a fragile sanctuary. Daniel didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how long he could keep her safe. But he knew one thing clearly. He wouldn't let her face the night alone ever again. And for the first time, Kaylee allowed herself to believe, however faintly, that maybe she wouldn't have to. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the streets glistening with puddles and the faint smell of wet metal. Inside Daniel's home, the air was quiet and still. Kaylee lay curled under the blankets, the sunlight filtering through the window, highlighting the soft sheen of her dark fur. She stirred as Daniel brought over another cup of warm broth, her golden eyes blinking slowly as she regained strength. I need to tell you something," she whispered, voice hesitant, almost afraid. Daniel knelt beside her, careful not to startle her. "I think you should know why I was out there. Alone." Daniel nodded. "Take your time." "I'm listening." Kaylee drew a shaky breath. "My name is Kaylee. I'm not from here. I'm Feline." She lowered her ears slightly, the gesture betraying her fear of judgment. "Our planet. It was destroyed long ago. Many of us scattered across the colonies. Some of us found work, some of us survived on the streets." Daniel listened quietly, trying to picture the story behind those words. He had known of the Feline people, but only in brief reports. Alien refugees struggling to find their place among humans. He had never imagined meeting one in person, especially one so young and vulnerable. Kaylee's voice shook as she continued. I was taken in by a group of traders. They said I could work for them. They promised safety, food, shelter. For a time it was okay, but I couldn't keep up. I wasn't fast enough. I wasn't strong enough. They abandoned me. They left me to die. Her tail curled tightly around her legs and she buried her face into the blanket, trembling. Daniel's heart ached. He had seen hardship, yes, but this was cruelty in its purest form. A child left alone because she couldn't meet someone else's expectations. He reached out, placing a careful hand on her shoulder. No one deserves that, he said softly. Not anyone. Kaylee lifted her head slowly, eyes glistening with tears. Humans, they don't like us. They say we're thieves, strays, monsters. I thought no one would ever care about me. Not really. Daniel shook his head, voice firm but gentle. That's not true, I care. And I won't let anyone hurt you because of who you are. You're not a monster. You're not a thief. You're a living, breathing being who deserves to be safe and loved. For a long moment, Kaylee simply stared at him, as if trying to believe that someone could speak with such honesty and compassion. Then she whispered, almost breaking, But why? Why me? Why help me? Daniel looked into her eyes and smiled faintly. Because it's the right thing to do. Because no one should be left alone in the cold, wet, and dark. Not you, not anyone. And because someone once helped me when I was lost. Maybe it's time I do the same for someone else. Kaylee's ears twitched, a small sign of acknowledgement. She moved slightly closer to him, just enough to feel his warmth without losing her cautious distance. It was the first real sign of trust since she had arrived. They sat like that for a while, the morning light growing stronger around them. Daniel told her about his life, simple, hard, lonely at times, and Kaylee listened, her eyes wide, absorbing every word. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of safety, a sense of belonging. I don't know if I can ever repay you, Kaylee said softly. I've never had someone care before. Not really. You don't have to repay me, Daniel replied, shaking his head.
You're alive.
That's enough. That's all that matters. Kaylee blinked slowly, a soft purr escaping her throat, a sound almost like relief, almost like gratitude. She had never imagined that a human could care so much. She had never imagined that anyone would stand up for her without asking for anything in return. Daniel reached out and gently brushed the wet fur from her face. You'll get stronger, he said. You'll learn to trust again. And I'll be here when you do, every step of the way. For the first time in a long time, Kaylee allowed herself to believe. Perhaps she wasn't completely alone anymore. Perhaps humans weren't all cruel as she had been taught to believe. Perhaps there was hope. Outside, the colony began to wake, indifferent to the small home where a human and a Feline girl sat together, forming a bond that would not break easily. And inside, a fragile life had been saved, a new chapter quietly beginning, one that neither of them would ever forget. Days passed, and life inside Daniel's small home began to change. At first, Kaylee was quiet and nervous, always watching, always ready to flee at the slightest noise. She kept to the corners of the house, her tail wrapped tightly around her body, golden eyes wary of every sound outside the door. She ate little, slept restlessly, and flinched whenever Daniel moved too quickly. But Daniel was patient. He never pushed her. He spoke gently, cooked extra meals, and left them on the table so she could take them when she felt safe enough. He never demanded answers or explanations. He simply made sure there was warmth in the house, food on the table, and space where she could breathe. One evening, the rain returned. The drops pattered softly against the roof while Daniel worked in his small garden at the back. Kaylee stood near the door, watching him curiously. She had never seen someone plant food before, never seen hands dig into the soil with such care. Her ears twitched as Daniel hummed to himself, his movement steady and calm. "Do you want to help?" Daniel asked without looking up. His tone was light, casual, as though it didn't matter if she said yes or no. Kaylee hesitated. For a long moment she stood frozen, claws flexing nervously, but then she stepped forward slowly until she crouched beside him. Daniel handed her a small seedling and she looked at it as if it were something magical. Carefully, with his guidance, she pressed it into the soil and covered it. Her ears flicked upward slightly. "I did it?" she asked, uncertain. Daniel smiled warmly. "You did. And if you take care of it, it'll grow, just like you." Kaylee tilted her head at his words, unsure how to respond. But later that night, she sat quietly by the little plant as though guarding it. For the first time, Daniel saw her relax just a little. Day by day, small changes bloomed. Kaylee began to sit at the table instead of hiding in the corner. She began to ask small questions about the things in his home. What does this tool do? Why do you light that lamp instead of the ceiling one? What's that picture on the wall? Her curiosity grew as her fear slowly shrank, and Daniel answered every question with patience. He never mocked her, never dismissed her. To him, her questions were not foolish. They were signs that she was learning to live again. One night, as they sat by the heater, Kaylee leaned her head gently against his arm. The gesture was small, almost uncertain, but Daniel felt the weight of it deeply. She was trusting him, even if only for a moment. Why? She asked softly, her voice almost lost to the crackle of the heater. Why help me? Others would have thrown me back into the street. They would have left me to die. Why didn't you? Daniel looked down at her. Her golden eyes shimmered in the warm light, filled with both fear and hope. He sighed, his voice low but steady. Because no one deserves to be left alone. Not you, not anyone. I know what it feels like to be lost, to be forgotten, and I won't let that happen to you. Her ears flicked and her tail loosened its tight curl. She stared at him for a long moment before closing her eyes. Then came a sound Daniel had never heard before, a soft, low vibration deep in her chest. It was a purr, fragile but real, a sound of comfort, of trust. The moment touched Daniel more than he expected. He reached out slowly, brushing a strand of fur from her face, and she didn't flinch. Instead, she pressed closer, her warmth sinking into him. From then on, their bond grew stronger. Kaylee began to smile, though faintly. She followed him into the garden, helped him cook, even sat with him as he repaired old tools. Each day she opened a little more, and each day Daniel felt more protective of her. To the outside world, she was still a stray Feline, something unwanted. But to him, she was Kaylee, a girl who had survived cruelty, who was learning to trust again, who deserved more than what the world had given her. And as she leaned against him that night, Daniel knew something with absolute certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would not let her face them alone. Because sometimes family wasn't chosen by blood. It was chosen in moments like this, when one soul reached out in the darkness and another answered. The days of quiet comfort could not last forever. On the colony, whispers traveled faster than the wind. It began with small things. Neighbors glancing at Daniel's window for too long, muttered words when he passed by the market. Children pointing and asking their parents why a beast was seen at his doorstep. Daniel ignored it at first. He had lived long enough to know people always found something to hate. But Kaylee noticed. Her ears drooped whenever she caught someone staring, and her tail curled tighter whenever she heard the word Feline spat like an insult. One afternoon, as they walked back from the small store with a bag of vegetables, a man called out from across the street. "Hey, power plant rat," the man shouted, pointing at Daniel. "You feeding strays now? Careful, she'll claw your eyes out when you're asleep." Kaylee froze, clutching Daniel's sleeve. Her eyes darted nervously to the ground. Daniel felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "She's a child," he said. "Show some respect." The man laughed harshly. "Child? That's no child. That's an animal, and animals don't belong in human homes." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond further. He led Kaylee away, his hand resting on her shoulder as she trembled. She didn't speak until they were safely behind the closed door of his home. Why do they hate us so much?" she whispered, her golden eyes shimmering with hurt. Daniel sighed, sitting heavily at the table. "Because people fear what they don't understand, and fear makes them cruel." Kaylee's ears drooped lower. "Maybe I should go. If I stay here, they'll hurt you. I don't want that." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Kaylee, listen to me. You are not the problem. They're haters, and I won't let that hate chase you away from the first safe place you've had in a long time." But Kaylee still looked unconvinced. Her small claws dug into the blanket she held, her body trembling. She wanted to believe him, but years of rejection whispered louder than his words. The tension grew worse in the following days. Daniel could feel the weight of disapproving stares at the plant. He heard the mutters when he passed through the market, and one evening 3 men confronted him outside the factory gates. "You think you're some kind of saint? One of them sneered, stepping in front of him. "Keeping that creature in your house like she's one of us? You're making us all look weak." Daniel's fists clenched. He met the man's eyes, his voice low and controlled. "She's not a creature. She's a person. And I won't throw her into the street just because you're too blind to see that." The man spat on the ground. "People like you ruin colonies. First it's one stray, then it's 10. Then before you know it, they're taking everything. Better you get rid of her before we do." Daniel stepped closer, his voice firm like iron. "If you try to touch her, you'll have to go through me." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the men muttered curses and walked away. But Daniel knew this wasn't over. He could feel it in his bones. That night, when he returned home, Kaylee was waiting by the door. Her eyes were wide, her ears flat against her head. She had overheard enough to know what was coming. "They know," she whispered. "They'll come for me. I should leave. Before they hurt you because of me." Daniel knelt in front of her, resting his hands gently on her trembling shoulders. "Kaylee, you're not leaving. Not this time. You've run enough. You deserve to stay. You deserve to live without fear. If they come, we'll face them together." Her eyes filled with tears and her voice broke. "But I'm just me. I'm not strong like you. I can't fight them." Daniel shook his head slowly. "You don't need to be strong. That's what I'm here for. You just need to keep living. That's enough." Kaylee leaned into him then, burying her face against his chest, her body trembling with both fear and hope. Daniel held her tightly, his heart heavy but steady. He didn't know how much longer he could protect her from the world outside, but he knew one thing clearly. He would never let her go. The colony might see her as an outcast, a stray, a problem. But to him she was Kaylee, a life worth protecting, a bond worth fighting for. And if the world wanted to break that bond, then it would have to break him first. The night was strangely quiet. Too quiet. Daniel sat at his workbench, fixing a broken tool, while Kaylee lay curled on the couch, her tail tucked around her like a blanket. She had been restless all evening, her ears twitching at every sound. Daniel noticed, but he didn't want to add to her worry. He kept his voice calm. "It's just the wind," he said softly, though even he didn't fully believe it. Kaylee nodded, but her eyes stayed on the door. Hours later, the silence broke. A sudden crash shattered the calm, a rock smashing through the front window, scattering shards across the floor. Kaylee yelped and leapt to her feet, her golden eyes wide with terror. Before Daniel could move, another rock hit, followed by angry voices outside. "Monster lover," someone shouted. "Burn the beast out," another voice cried, and then came the smell, sharp, bitter smoke curling into the room. Fire. Kaylee froze, her body rigid with fear. Memories of being abandoned, of cruel hands pushing her away, all came rushing back. She clutched the blanket tightly, trembling so hard she could barely breathe. "Daniel, it's fire. They'll burn us." Daniel grabbed her hand firmly. "Not if we move now. Come on." He pulled her toward the back door, the heat already licking at the walls, flames creeping through the broken front window. Smoke thickened in the air, stinging their eyes. Kaylee coughed, stumbling, but Daniel held her tight, guiding her through the dark kitchen. They burst out the back door into the cold night. But waiting there was one of the men who had threatened them before. His face twisted with hate, and in his hand was a metal pipe. "You should have listened," the man snarled. "Better she burns now than slitting your throat later." Kaylee let out a fearful cry, her claws twitching at her sides. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Her heart pounded in her ears. Daniel stepped in front of her, fists clenched, his voice a low growl. "She's not what you think. She's not your enemy. But if you lay one hand on her, you'll regret it," the man spat. "She's a Feline. That's all I need to know." He raised the pipe. Before Daniel could react, Kaylee moved. With a cry that was half fear, half fury, she lunged forward, knocking the weapon aside with her claws. The man stumbled, shocked by the sudden strike. Kaylee's movements were clumsy, desperate, but they gave Daniel just enough time to shove the man back hard into the mud. "Run!" Daniel shouted, grabbing Kaylee's hand again. They sprinted into the night, the glow of the fire burning behind them, the angry shouts fading as they ran deeper into the colony's shadowed alleys. Kaylee stumbled more than once, but Daniel never let go, pulling her along, his determination unshaken. Finally, far from the smoke and the flames, they collapsed in an abandoned storage shed. Kaylee sank to the floor gasping, her fur singed in places, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to bring this on you." Daniel knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. She trembled against him, her claws clutching his shirt like a lifeline. He pressed his cheek against her head, speaking softly, fiercely. "You didn't bring this, Kaylee. Hate did. Their fear, their cruelty. This isn't your fault. But they'll never stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No matter where I go, no matter what I do, they'll always hate me. I'll never belong anywhere." Daniel pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. His own burned with determination. "Then we'll find somewhere new. Somewhere they can't touch you. Somewhere you can live without fear. I don't care how far we have to go. I don't care what it costs me. You are not alone. Not anymore." Kaylee's tears fell freely then, but for the first time they weren't just from fear. She buried her face against him, clinging tightly as if afraid he would vanish if she let go. Daniel held her, feeling the weight of her pain, the depth of her trust, and the fire of his own resolve. The colony behind them was no longer home. It was a place of hate and danger. But with Kaylee in his arms, Daniel knew home wasn't a place. It was a promise, and he had just made that promise with every breath in his body. The night after the fire felt endless. Daniel and Kaylee stayed hidden in the old storage shed, too exhausted to speak, too shaken to sleep. Smoke still hung faintly in the air, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. Kaylee sat curled up in the corner, hugging her knees, her ears drooping low. She had stopped trembling, but the emptiness in her eyes made Daniel's heart ache. He knew what she was thinking, that maybe it would be easier if she left, if she disappeared into the forests beyond the colony so no one else would get hurt because of her. Daniel crouched down in front of her. "Kaylee," he said gently. She blinked at him slowly, her voice a whisper. "Why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep saving me? I'm nothing but trouble. Your home is gone. Your neighbors hate you now. If you stay with me, you'll lose everything." Daniel sat back on his heels, silent for a moment. Then he gave a small, tired smile. "You think a home is just walls and neighbors? No, Kaylee, home is where someone waits for you. Home is who you choose to protect. And I chose you the moment I opened that door and found you there." Her throat tightened and her eyes shimmered with tears. "But what if you regret it later? What if one day I hurt you without meaning to? What if I can't fit into your world?" He reached out and touched her hand, warm and steady. "Then I'll still be here. You don't have to fit into my world. We'll make our own, together." For a long time, Kaylee stared at him, her heart aching with emotions too big to name. Slowly, she leaned forward, resting her head against his shoulder. His arms wrapped around her without hesitation, holding her close as if he'd never let go. By dawn, the colony was buzzing with rumors. The fire had destroyed Daniel's home, and the whispers spread fast. Some said he had fled with the creature, others claimed she had bewitched him. But Daniel didn't care anymore. He and Kaylee had already made their decision. They stood at the edge of the colony's boundary that morning. Beyond lay the wild stretches of forest and mountains, places where few settlers ever dared to go. Danger, yes, but also freedom. Kaylee clutched the small pack Daniel had prepared, her tail twitching nervously. She looked back one last time, her chest heavy. "You're really leaving it all behind," she whispered. Daniel glanced back too, then shrugged lightly. "There's nothing there for me anymore. But there's something ahead, and she's standing right beside me." Kaylee's ears flicked and her face burned with warmth. She lowered her gaze, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Then I'll walk with you. As far as you'll let me." Daniel smiled and squeezed her shoulder. "As far as the stars, Kaylee, as far as we can go." Their journey was not easy. The forest was cold and vast, filled with strange noises at night. Sometimes Kaylee's instincts made her bristle or lash out, but Daniel never pulled away. He steadied her when fear overtook her, and she guarded him fiercely when shadows moved too close. Step by step, trust grew deeper between them, stronger than the walls of any colony could ever be. One evening, weeks later, they stopped at a hill overlooking a valley bathed in starlight. Kaylee sat beside Daniel, her head tilted to the sky. Her golden eyes reflected the stars like fireflies in the dark. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The life you left behind?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No, because what I wanted most wasn't there. It's here, with you." Kaylee's breath caught, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe. Believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't cursed to be unwanted forever. Maybe she wasn't a burden. Maybe she was chosen. She leaned gently against him, her tail curling around his arm. Daniel didn't move away. He just sat with her in the silence, watching the stars, feeling the weight of their promise settle into something unbreakable. They were no longer a man and a stray. They were no longer hunted and helpless. They were two souls, scarred but unbroken, walking a road no one else dared to walk. And in that quiet moment under the endless sky, Kaylee finally understood. She wasn't alone anymore. She was home with him.